Richard. Let me interject my own brief comment on all four papers. Wow. And now for a more articulate comment, Philip Hamburger. He's the Morris and Hilda Friedman Professor of Law at Columbia Law School.
Well, thank you very much. I'm borrowing the Gideon Bible here, not because I'm going to quote it, but because I'm tall and I want to raise up my notes. In fact, that's this right. Well, the focus of these papers has been a conflict or tension between law and liberty, obligation and love, the letter and the spirit, the form and the reality. And indeed, when you put it this way, how can you be on one side rather than the other, right? Our learned speakers have elegantly traced essential aspects of these tensions. Richard Weisberg, in Hermeneutics, looks at the interplay between intransigence and flexibility in Jewish law. It was not a sharp tension. And then observes how the tension was introduced through Christian dualism between body and spirit, letter and spirit, and so forth. David Berger has looked at Jewish law and has found that modern circumstances have introduced these tensions even into Jewish law. Fidelity and humanity once were not sharply at odds, but these tensions may be exacerbated in modernity, a point I want to come back to. Jay Michelson has looked at American law and has seen how Paul's anti-Judaism has become a foundation for American anti-legalism. And he finds interesting parallels between anti-Semitism and anti-lawyerism. And Mark Galanter has looked at Jewish jokes. In America, it turns out, the anti-legalist tendency is so strong that the lawyer has displaced the Jew in Jewish jokes. And this is another reason, I suppose, to be grateful to lawyers. They've saved us from anti-Semitism. I'm not going to go into detail analyzing each paper. Suffice it to say, they've been all very elegant and deal with this extraordinary breadth, ranging from St. Paul all the way to Clinton, without overgeneralizing in the ways that one might worry about. So these are important papers. From the vantage point of American law, they should give new insights into Judaism. From the perspective of Judaism, new insights in American law. And I must say, it's a rare moment when the theological origins of modern anti-formalism become so explicit. Not just anti-legalism, but anti-formalism. In law schools, we live every day with anti-formalism. And it's treated as a modern matter with its origins no further back than John Stuart Mill. But as John Stuart Mill's wife would have informed us, this has older origins, not merely in her Unitarianism, but in a long tradition of Christianity that goes back 2,000 years. I suppose if one's a Zoroastrian, one might even say it's older. My goal is to step back from the papers and, at some risk, I suppose, to my reputation, try to draw an even broader picture. The sense of tension between law and liberty, form and reality, is a central feature of modern American law. The forms of law seem alien to reality, and realism, and I have the modern legal realists in mind amongst others, seems to cut against the formality. Freedom seems to require liberation from the constraints of form. The rights themselves, we're told, are not absolute. And so one hears repeatedly from the Supreme Court an almost dogmatic religious insistence that there are no absolutes, and this from a court that focuses on the Bill of Rights. This is interesting, isn't it? And it may indeed derive from religion. Now, this tension within the law obviously is not new, and it therefore has no theological origins come up in a conference about Jews. But the tension, I would suggest, is not merely theological in origin. It's also probably a product of what one might call modernization, of social developments that, although called modern, are really quite ancient. For Jews, an ethnic nation, liberty and law ideally were not in tension. Jews acquire their law in the course of their liberation, on the escape from Egypt, and they thus find their freedom under law. They often were rebellious against the law, but it was their law, and they ideally needed no freedom from it. For Christians, however, the law was apt to seem in tension with the freedom. Christianity flourishes in the diversity of the late Roman Empire. Rather than an ethnic nation, Christians eventually establish their religion amongst different peoples. And so to the question, who is my neighbor? The Christian answer is, everybody is my neighbor. And it's not clear for many Jews in many parts of Jewish history that they can say this. And thus, rather than adhere to the law of any one nation, Christians need a love that transcends law. And obviously, this creates political opportunities for people like Constantine, but we can leave that aside. Christians, moreover, define themselves against Judaism and its law, and Christian liberty thus necessarily is to some degree a repudiation of Jewish law. This is inescapable. Now, of course, not all Christians take this as far as others, and we can easily caricature the love versus law position when you only compare, for example, Luther and Melanchthon, teacher and student, to see the tensions within Christianity itself. But there is nonetheless here an essential dynamic of Christianity. This tension repeatedly has flourished among persons alienated from law or some other fixity, and of course especially in modern times. Among 19th and 20th century American Christians, theological liberals have embraced love and rejection of law in a way that has transformed Christianity. American Christianity, indeed American Catholicism, has been transformed in this way. And so it's not even a matter of Protestantism versus Catholicism. And so eventually even modern Jews, interestingly beginning in Ohio, there's a great book I'll never write called Liberal Ohio. But, in Toledo, interesting, pardon?
Could happen.
Yes, there is a book, Liberal Kentucky, but that's not what I have in mind. So interesting things were happening in Toledo, and it eventually happens in the rest of the United States. For modern Jews, attracted by liberal theology and the opportunity to escape the constraints, frankly, of Jewish life, have been drawn to a vision in which liberty and love may perhaps conflict with law. And so in their religion, in their law, and in their politics, these modernized Jews seek a liberation from the burdens of rigid law. They reject not merely orthodoxy, but all orthodoxies. And in that sense, the liberal Christian and the liberal Jew may have much in common. Having long been oppressed, many Jews savored this release from constraint in a manner that actually was well captured by Montesquieu when describing changing conceptions of freedom. And if you'll excuse me, I'll quote from him. It is my favorite passage from Montesquieu. "Desires change their objects. That which one used to love, one loves no longer. One was free under the laws. One wants now to be free against them. Each citizen is like a slave who has escaped from his master's house. What was a maxim is now called severity. What was a rule is now called constraint. What was a vigilance is now called fear." Freed from the European bondage, many Jews came to relish freedom, a freedom that often seemed in tension with law. Now, of course, this is an old story for Jews. When freed from their Egyptian bondage, many Jews rebelled against the law and sought a freedom from it, but in their exodus, they eventually become a nation and find their freedom in their law. And so, at least ideally, liberty and law, love and duty, letter and spirit can seem but one. In the end, the temptation to seek a freedom from law or against law may be essentially human. Anyone, not just Christians, not just Jews, anyone can appreciate liberating circumstances, whether modernization or a release from slavery. Nonetheless, what is true for all persons has perhaps been notably true for Jews in the past 2 centuries. Jews perhaps may feel it more than others. Because Jews don't have any law, they understand themselves to have a law coming directly from God, and to rebel against that may be of a different order. And yet, at the same time, Jews in the last 2 centuries have experienced both modernization and a release from bondage. No wonder many Jews have reconceptualized their freedom as a freedom from law. And yet, at the same time, many Jews also feel anxiety about this and worry that perhaps they depend upon law, and perhaps that the gains cannot quite overcome the loss. And so in these circumstances, American law perhaps offers Jews what they need theologically and sociologically, a law that offers an escape from law. Caught between ideals of law and freedom from law, many Jews find redemption not in Jewish law, not in Christian love, but in American law. Thank you.
Thank you.